Welcome to the very first of a brand new series on the channel called DIY Basics, where each week I'm going to be taking you through a different topic to improve your DIY knowledge and to give you the confidence to give it a go. Today I'm going to show you how to properly wire in and fit a UK 13 amp plug. So even though all appliances these days have to be sold by law with an attached plug, I still find I need to fit these regularly, whether the plug has been damaged or I'm extending a cable, a variety of other reasons. And looking at how they're being sold in the shops, I'm not the only one, so I still think there's a requirement to know how to fit a plug properly. Today I'm going to start off with a completely cut 1.5mm flex. So come in close and I'll show you the details. So here's my brand new UK 13 amp plug. It's called a 13 amp plug because that's the highest rating that you can put through it, but you can actually downgrade it. If you change the fuse, you can downgrade it to sort of 5 amps or 3 amps or whatever. Today we're going to be leaving it as a 13 amp supply, and that's probably 95% of the appliances you have in the home will still be using a 13 amp supply. So today I'm going to be fixing it to this completely cut off bit of flex. So let's have a look at the sort of things we need. Depending on your plug, you're going to need either or both a crosshead screwdriver and a flathead screwdriver. Some of the screws these days can be done by either, so that's why I say it depends on the make of your plug, depending on what screwdriver you need as well. I'm just going to be doing all my cutting with a very basic pair of pliers because I think that's what the average DIY at home is going to be using. But if you've got wire strippers, then that's going to make life a lot easier and probably more accurate as well. And the outer insulation, I'm actually going to be using what I would call a Stanley knife or a utility knife, just to cleanly cut that off, rather than this, which tends to rip with the outer insulation. So all new plugs tend to come with a little bit of information on the front that you have to take off, although it can be a little bit confusing because it's obviously got the fuse on the right hand side, but what that refers to is if I actually turn the plug round, the fuse is on the right hand side, so it doesn't work this way, but it does work once you've opened up the back. So we'll just leave that to one side and we can refer to it a little bit later. So to open the plug, or most plugs, you'll see 3 screws. The bigger one in the middle actually opens the plug, and these 2 down the end actually clamp the cable. So I found with this one that I can use my crosshead screwdriver fairly easily. Most of these screws are encapsulated, so when you turn them over, they don't fall out as well. We put the cover to one side as well. And this is what we've got inside. And just going through the various components, we've got a cable clamp that stops the cable being pulled out if for any reason someone pulls it by mistake. On the right hand side, we've got the fuse, and as I said, this is a 13 amp fuse, which is probably the most common. And then we've got 3 terminals, and they will be labelled in the plug. And if they're not, well, they should be, but you can always refer to this as well. So I know from experience that the one on the right next to the fuse is going to be live, which is brown. The one at the top is an earth, which is a yellow and green. And the one on the left, which is neutral, is going to be blue. So this is the layout. And essentially we have to get our cable in there, connected to the three connectors, and safely, so if someone tries to pull it, it doesn't come loose at all. The other thing you'll find with UK plugs, and this is completely normal, is that the 3 pins can actually be removed from the plug body. You can actually push them out, and they actually come out the back with a little bit of pulling. And that's nothing to be alarmed about, that's pretty normal. And we'll come back to that in a minute because that can actually help us when we're connecting our wires. So the first thing we're going to do is actually open this cable clamp so we can gain a little bit more access. What I'd recommend is taking one of these 2 screws out completely, removing it, and then just undoing the other screw enough so this cable clamp can just rotate and just move out the way so you can put the cable in nice and easily. So we're going to put that down, and let's do a little bit of work firstly on the cable. So as I said, this is a 1.5mm squared flex, which is pretty normal for the home, for appliances, and I've just cut it off completely straight at the moment. So the first thing I want to do is to just expose the wires inside so we can start working with them. And the way I like to do this, because it works quite neatly, let's just focus this in a little bit, is to use a utility knife and come back down maybe about 40 to 45 millimeters back. So you've got plenty there. You can always then trim it up a little bit and just make a very light score. I've hardly pushed that at all, but what you find is when you pull it back, it will exaggerate that score, and you can just open it up a little bit without pushing too much. The last thing we want to do is to damage the wire underneath. So we're just rolling this around just so we can open it up. Oh, there you go. And it's broke. So that's naturally broke. I know that I haven't damaged the wires underneath and they're still fully intact. So if I just turn it round, I might be able to persuade it to go all the way round. There you go. Just a little bit of persuasion at the end there. That should just break off. Now that I know is cut all the way round, but I've not damaged any of the cables, any of the wires underneath, because I never cut all the way through it. So that's the reason why I like to do it that way. So with that removed, we've now got 3 wires. We've got the brown, the blue, and the yellow and green. Now, some of your appliances may not have 3 wires. It may only have 2. And what you find is you may find an appliance that's only got the brown and the blue, which isn't the end of the world. Just some appliances just aren't earthed and they don't carry this cable. If the wire is in there, if the earthing wire is in there, you really do need to fit it to the plug. If it's not in there, then don't worry too much about it. So we've got an earthing wire, so we're going to fit all 3 of these. Now, what we need to do to get this in safely is cut each one of these wires so it matches up with these 3 terminals, and each one is going to be a different length. At the same time, this cable clamp at the bottom end of the plug needs to be clamping onto this outside white insulation. It mustn't be clamping onto the wires like this. We mustn't end up with a situation where we can see the wires at the bottom here coming out. So really we want this fully pushed in, so this clamp is clamping onto this nice white external insulation, and that means it's going to clamp nice and well. If anyone tries to pull it, it's going to be fairly secure. So we now need to cut these 3 wires. Now let's just spread them where we want to be. We know that the brown is live and it's going to the right, the blue is going to the left, and the earth is going all the way round up to the top. Now I find the best sequence to do this is actually to do the live, put the live wire in first, and I'll tell you why in a minute. First of all, let's just make sure that the insulation is lined up to this cable clamp so we're in the right position. And if you see, I'll just mark it for demonstration purposes. If you see, we really need to cut the brown at the end of this terminal here, about there. And we need to strip it from about there. So we're just going to do the brown for now and get that connected, and then we can worry about the other 2. But I always like to do the brown first because it's the shortest and it's the one that gives you the least flexibility. See, this blue can go up and come back down again, and even the earth, it gives you a bit of flexibility. But this brown, the live straight into this, is going to be the first one to pull, and it's also going to be the first one that has no flexibility. So we're going to do that first. So the first thing I'm going to do at the end mark is just cut this to length, just get rid of that excess. And now I need to expose this copper by about, let's say about 5 millimeters. That's just going to be enough to get into the terminal. Now you can obviously cut it again with like a Stanley knife or utility knife, or you can just use the pressure on these pliers, not fully, else you're just going to cut it off. But if you just clamp and then with your thumb just pull, and there you go, you should be able to cut off around about 5 millimeters. And once that's done, a simple twist with your fingers means that those wires in that flex are not going to fray. So back to the plug before we try to fit anything. If we just undo all of these terminals, it makes it easier if you undo all of them and make sure they're all open. Here, I'll just show you on this earth pin here. I just want to undo this screw enough that that hole is fully open, but the screw hasn't fallen out. If you undo it too far, you can actually take the screw off, but you don't want to do that because you're just going to lose it. So if we put that back in, and then we can make sure that goes back into the frame. So let's see how that fits, having trimmed the live there. Well, that fits quite nicely. You can see that there's no copper exposed here. We don't want this exposed all the way down here. We want as little as exposed as possible. I can't see anything there at all. At the same time, if I turn around the cable clamp, it's nicely fitting over the external insulations there. So it looks to me like we've got that just about in the right place. So with that in the right place, now let's have a look at the other two cables. I'm going to do the earth next. This comes and bends all the way around to the top. And maybe I can take a little bit off there, maybe just a couple of millimeters. If I just mark it again with my marker, maybe just trim a couple of millimeters off there, and then take off the insulation 5 millimeters back. I think that will be just about nice there. Now with the neutral, the blue, we always seem to have a little bit more flexibility, because by definition the wire, the blue wire's got to go up and then come back down into this connector here. So with that in mind, that can be a little bit more flexible than this live, should I say, the brown one. And that's why I would always recommend doing the brown one first, because there's no flexibility. Once you've got that in, then nothing's going anywhere. So the blue, I think we will go up and back down again. Let me just turn that a little bit. So I still want to take a little bit off. I'm going to trim it to about there and take off the insulation. So back with the pliers. So back to the plug again. I'm going to fit the live in first, because as I said, there's no flexibility with that. And we're just going to double check. That's going to come back, and that's going to be just about right. Okay, so at this point, what I would do, and I would recommend, is to be tightening off that live. And you need it fairly tight in there. And we can see, now that's tight, there's no copper coming out the back end, and that insulation is cut just nicely, that we've got a good connection. There's nothing coming out the end, and that is pretty tight. And obviously we've got the right clamp position here for the insulation. And this is where I said before, it can sometimes help you by taking out these prongs, because I can take out the earth one and fit it in here with it outside. So let's just do that. Now I can do the final tightening once it's back in the body. I'll just put the pin back into the body there. There you are, there's the earth in quite a nice position. Not too much copper showing. And I'm going to do the same for the neutral. I might as well take the pin out. It just makes it easier. So I can fit that in there nicely. The insulation isn't snagging on it. At the same time, it's not as if I've got any copper showing. A little bit out the back end, but that won't hurt at all. I can do the final tightening once it's in the frame. So let's just put it in there and push it in. Push the blue down, and I can do the final tightening of the neutral. And it's important that you tighten these properly and quite firmly. Like any electrical connection, if you don't tighten them up properly, you can get potentially resistance between the wire and the pin. And if you've got resistance, then it's going to start heating up, and that's not good. Now those are nice and tight. So just before we put the top back on, we want to make sure that all the wires are sitting nicely at the bottom. And if you've cut them like this, and you've cut them to the right length, then they should be looking something like that. and they won't get in the way. What you don't want them is you don't want them poking up and ready to snag things like that main screw there. You want them all tucked in as low down as possible. And that to me looks like a fairly neat job. So all I need to do now is twist over the cable clip and put this screw back in that I took out earlier. Let's just do that from underneath. There you go. So I'm just going to centre this, and that looks pretty good. So if I just turn it over, then I can just tighten up both of these at the same rate to make sure that that cable is held in there, just in case anyone ever pulls it or trips up and it doesn't pull out. So there we go, we have the outside cable clip tightening onto the external, which is completely right. We can't see any of the cables out the bottom of the plug. That is nice and tight, that's not going anywhere however much I pull it. Let's just double check. We've got 3 tight connectors, the brown to the live, the yellow and green, so they're all nice and tight, and the cables are all out the way. So if that's correct, then that should just clip onto there just perfectly. Now, if you can't get that to sit properly, if it's open like this, then you've got a problem. It doesn't matter how much you tighten up this screw here, it's not going to work properly. So at this point, if it's not sitting flush, like you can see it here, if it's just open a little bit, you've got to go back in here and sort this out. But mine is sitting nice and flush, so I can put that on. Just tighten the case up, just check everything is fitting nicely. The cable clamp is obviously doing its job. There's no way that's ever going to come out of there, and it's clamping on. I can't see any wires coming out of there. It looks fairly tidy, and I know the inside is nice and tight, so that will last many years. So that is how you put a plug on, and I will see you next time.